Hi there, everyone. Welcome to my introduction to economics. What I'm going to try and do here is explain in a few minutes with a very basic drawing how the economy works overall. So it's a nice little chance for us to understand the type of topics we might be studying through an A-level or IB economics course. So the first thing to understand is that economics is about people. It's about understanding how people can improve their lives. People are organized themselves into groups which we call households. So typically groups of individuals who work together to improve their collective lives. Households have got certain things that they can use to try and improve their lives. And the thing that most households have is they have some form of labor. That labor may be highly skilled or not particularly highly skilled, physical, mental labor. Labor is basically the efforts that we can make as human beings to work. Some wealthier households may also have some capital, some spare money lying around that they might use to try and earn them an income. And similarly, some households have land. They own land that they can use to generate some sort of income. The way it works is that households give their labor or capital, if they've got any spare, or any land that they might own, they give them to firms, which are organizations that make things, because the firms need these, what we call the factors of production, in order to operate. There's a fourth factor of production, which we call enterprise, and that refers to the households that decide to start their own firms by combining labor, capital, and land to create a new firm. Households don't do this. They don't give their labor or their capital or their land to firms to use out of the goodness of their hearts. They do this so they can earn an income. As I said, most households just have their labor. So most households give their labor to firms, and in return, they receive wages. Those of us who are fortunate to have some spare capital might earn some interest on that capital. And if you own some land and you rent it out, you receive rent. These are all forms of income that households can earn. Of course, if you're brave enough to start your own firm as an entrepreneur, then you may also be able to earn some profit. So this is the first interesting thing about economics for students that are starting for the first time, is that we are going to explore the ways in which households can, use their labor in firms to generate an income. And that's important because all of you guys have to, at some point, decide what it is that you want to do with your labor, with your brain and your body, in order to generate an income. Some of you have got particular talents in particular areas. Some of you are interested in developing talent in different areas. So deciding what sort of labor you want to cultivate through your education and training, and what sort of firms you'd like to work at, that's a really interesting thing. So economics, that's the first area of interest for us as economists. Now, earning income, believe it or not, is actually useless to us as households unless we spend that income on things that will improve our lives. So that comes in what we call consumer spending. Who do we spend the money on? Well, we spend the money on firms, of course. And those firms provide us with the goods and services that we require to try and improve our livelihoods over time. So our spending and the goods and services we receive in return for that spending, that tends to happen by and large in markets. The marketplace is where that action happens. So you can see that there's a bit of a flow of money going around the economy. If you follow the yellow line here, we first of all give our factors of production to firms. The firms pay us an income in return, and they use our factors of production to make goods and services, which we buy with the income that we earn from firms. It's a circular flow of money that goes around the system. So this gives us the first indication of why some economies are rich and households have very high standards of living, and why some economies are not so well off and households have much lower standards of living. Some economies have got very good, high quality factors of production. They've got highly skilled labor, they've got good amounts of capital, they've got good natural resources, they've got excellent, well organized, efficient firms, and who can afford to pay on high income because the consumers are spending lots of money and they're producing high quality goods and services which improve our livelihoods. So some economies have got that in abundance, and of course some economies so far have yet to really develop that, what we might call developing economies. And they've got relatively low skilled labor. They maybe have some issues with their natural resources or disruption to their factors of production through war or corruption and so on. And they also may have very inefficient firms and which can only afford to pay very low rates of income, and so they're not really able to generate high standards of goods and services for their households. Now, unfortunately, markets on their own don't actually deliver all the goods and services that we need in an economy. And there are certain things that can only be provided by governments, things we might call public goods, things like national defense, institutions, rule of law, but also things like merit goods, things that we consider are desirable that are not very well provided in the private markets, things like education, things like healthcare, and these are the things that governments generally step in to provide. So we have to fund the governments. It costs money to run a government. And so we do that by giving some of our income in the form of tax to the government. And of course, the government then decides where they're going to spend it. In a democracy, we get to choose what sort of government we have. And there are different options when we go to the general election about what levels of tax and spending and the types of priorities different political parties might have. So we'll definitely be exploring that in A-level or IB economics. Now, we also have a slight problem with this model because the levels of consumer spending often aren't enough for firms to really develop at the pace that they might like. So firms typically, especially when they're starting out, tend to go to the financial sector, what we call banks, and the general banking sector to get large investment inputs, so large amounts of money up front that they need to buy big machinery and to get their businesses up and running. So very important to have a financial sector. Now, that's no bad thing for households either, because it turns out that households don't actually want to spend 100% of their income. What they actually want to do is they usually like to save some of it for a rainy day in case they need large expenditures in the future. So we put our savings into the banking or financial sector. And what they're supposed to do, if they get it right, is they're supposed to invest that money sensibly and wisely into the types of firms that are going to really drive our economy forward. So that's what the financial sector does. And of course, lots of households actually go work in the financial sector too. It's quite a big sector of industry in the UK in particular. And the final area where money leaks out of this circular flow of income, comes back in again, is with relation to the overseas sector. It turns out that economies usually don't have everything that they want to buy within their own borders. And so money leaves the UK economy, in this case, in order to buy imports, and it comes back into the UK economy if overseas consumers wish to buy our goods, and we call that exports. So we start to see here how the economic system fits together. Economies that do well, economies that have households that have got high living standards, are ones where there's good quality factors of production, there's efficient, well-organized firms that pay high levels of income, where there's high rates of consumer spending, in efficient markets that most importantly deliver the types of goods and services that improve our living standards and make our households better off. On top of that, there are well-run governments that have got good economic planning, that take enough tax from households to be able to deliver the types of government spending that really can help the economy. We also have a really efficient financial sector that gives households a really safe place to put their savings, and that makes good, sound investments in the types of firms that are really going to improve our livelihoods. Likewise, we've got a good, healthy trade balance over on the overseas sector, not too much money leaving the economy on imports compared to the amount of money coming back in on exports. Now, of course, that doesn't always work out for every economy. There are some economies, excuse me, where markets seem to constantly fail to provide households with the goods and services that will improve their lives, where governments are corrupt, badly organized, they waste the money, where the financial sector, we saw 10 years ago, the financial sector made a huge, disastrous series of errors and affected our economies around the world in ways that was not at all going to improve household living standards. And also, economies can get stuck in a pattern, as the UK has over many years, where they seem to persistently leak more money out on imports than they get back in on exports. There are some other problems too. Some economies have got many households who for some reason are unable to find firms that want to use their labour. We call that unemployment, and it's an area of particular interest to us as economists. Some economies have got scenarios where a very small number of households have got very high living standards and high income, and other households have got very low income, where some economies have much more compressed distribution of income. That is very important. There's some worrying statistics about the UK's levels of inequality compared to some of our Northern European neighbours. So we're interested in how the income is distributed, what the income is spent on. You'll also be aware that there are some markets that are very damaging to the environment, that have got very poor sustainability records. So we are interested in looking at the whole system as economists, trying to figure out how does an economy get all these things to operate in a way that improves living standards for the greatest number of households possible. So a few labels in terms of types of course content. You'll hear the terms microeconomics and macroeconomics, right? Microeconomics is where we zoom in to these markets, pick a market at a time, and try and work out how prices and quantities and how trends in markets emerge. Macroeconomics zooms out of this picture and tries to have an overview of how the whole economy functions in broad terms, so big variables like GDP, inflation, unemployment levels, on an aggregate level, to compare economies with each other. So there's going to be so many fantastic things to explore in this course. I really hope you enjoy it. And things that will inform your decisions as consumers in the future, as workers, as citizens in the future. And hopefully by the end of the course, you'll have a slightly better idea about how all these bits of this jigsaw puzzle fit together to create the type of world, the type of economy that we want to live in, the type of system that delivers the best possible benefit to households in the future. That's the aim of economics, to try and understand that. Great that you can join us on this remote course, and I hope you enjoy it.